Hi, everyone. As part of our Being Patient Perspectives live talk, we're really hoping to understand from the first person perspective of what it's like to live with Alzheimer's or related dementias, and also what it's like for people living with them. And so I'm really pleased to have Brian LeBlanc here joining us today from Florida. He was diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's and later vascular dementia. And joining him as well as his life partner and care partner, Maureen Rulison, who's a board certified patient advocate specializing in dementia. So thank you both so much for joining us.
Our pleasure.
Thank you.
So Brian, I want to start off, and Maureen, I want to start off to ask, how are the both of you doing? We've been coping with the lockdown here during the pandemic for so long now, and I think finally we're seeing some light at the end of the tunnel in terms of vaccines underway and just the restrictions being eased now. What was the early days of the pandemic like for you, Brian and Maureen, and has it been better now that things are opening up?
Well, I could sum it up in 3 words. We're still alive. Being together, if you're together, for a weekend, that's fun. You can get out and do things. But when you're under, what do you call it when you couldn't go out?
Right, we were in lockdown.
Lockdown, yeah.
Quarantine.
When you're quarantined and you're the only 2 people in the house, 24/7, day after day after day, for me, my anxiousness rose to a very, very high
Pinnacle.
Yeah, pinnacle. And that did not make it very easy for Maureen. She saw my wrath. She saw me decline. My anxiousness got out of control sometimes. My anger got out of control sometimes. There wasn't anything that we could do to get out or go somewhere. So we were just here. And that, jokingly I said, yeah, we're still alive. We didn't kill each other, but it wasn't easy. It just wasn't. She could probably give you a different perspective, but I'd like to hear from your ideas.
Well, it was tough watching how rapidly Brian not being able to live in his passion, not being able to advocate and educate, not being able to connect with people live. It was painful to watch him wake up every day, and I could literally see the progression. And he fought valiantly, and that's really where we came up with We Are Dementia Strong, was as a way for Brian and I, but mostly Brian, to continue to reach out and live in his passion and have purpose and hopefully slow down the progression of Alzheimer's.
And both of you are vaccinated now, right? And Brian was telling me that it was so nice to just be able to see friends last Friday, right?
Oh, first time, except for a few family members that were in our bubble. And of course, everybody else was vaccinated that we saw, and we did it outside. So we were still maintaining social distancing. We were still being very cautious because, it doesn't prevent you from catching it. It just prevents you from hopefully ending up in the hospital if you do catch it. So we were still safe, but I watched Brian come back alive. I mean, it took him a little bit, but as everybody started interacting and talking, he started joining in, and I just watched him. It was like he was ramping up to go on stage to be a stand-up comedian.
I must say that wine helped a little bit. So,
and Brian, I want to take us back a little bit, back to the diagnosis process, and before the diagnosis process of your first diagnosis of Alzheimer's was, what were some of the early signs of dementia that you really noticed, and in what setting was it? Was it at work or with your family at home? Can you describe some of the symptoms and what it was like?
it was a combination of everything. What I started, well, I was getting lost a lot. I was still driving at the time, because I didn't really think that there was anything going on with me. I knew I was forgetting things, but it wasn't really knowing that I was forgetting things. Only way I would remember is to have someone remind me that I forgot to do something. I guess the straw that broke the camel's back was one night I was going to pick up takeout from a Chinese restaurant, and it was literally, I guess, a half a mile from the house. And so I got in my truck. I went to what I thought was the restaurant, but I wound up probably about 40 miles away from my home. And that really was something that scared me. I had been lost before. And so, like I said, I think I mentioned that I was still married at the time, with two stepchildren. And when I got home from finally picking up the food, my daughter and wife were sitting there, and she said, sit down. We need to have a talk. And so I did. I sat down and we started talking, and she asked me, she said, how many times have you been lost when you were driving? And I tried to start. I said, you mean before today? And she said, yeah. I said, well, I have no idea. I said, however, being that you asked that question, I pretty much think that you know the answer. And so she pulled out this little book to where she had documented every time that I had been lost. And I had been lost over 30 times and had no idea what it was.
Hmm.
And so I also was struggling because I had been terminated from my job. I was a marketing executive, where I did radio shows and TV shows and wrote copy for commercials and so forth. And I started missing deadlines. I wouldn't write any new copy. Now, I didn't notice this myself. I was told this on the day that I was being terminated. And that was rough because, I loved what I did. I had found my niche in life, doing that type of job. And it kept me running, it kept me occupied, and I was pretty good at it early on. But I didn't know I had Alzheimer's at the time, but And I didn't even know that I was missing job requirements, you know, with the stuff I was supposed to be doing. And, you know, they just said that they wasn't going to help. They weren't able to keep me on because I was making too many mistakes. So I was fired. I tried catching on to a couple of other places, and I did manage to stay with them for a couple of days, but I was not able to catch on because day after day, I wouldn't remember what I learned the previous day. And then I went to work for a cell phone company. And I said, okay, I've got to write things down, what I've learned. And so I had this little notebook, and I would copy down all these things that I learned the day before. Well, I brought the notebook back with me the first day and just forgot I had it. It was in my top pocket, but I forgot I had it. And then I believe it was on the third day, I completely lost the book. I had no idea where it was, no idea what was written in it. And the manager saw me struggling, and he says, what's going on with you? And I said, I don't know. I said, I can talk to people about the phone. I said, but I can't work the register. I said, is there any way that you can, you know, allow me to continue talking to people about the phone, but have someone else do the register? He says, no. He says that, you know, what if everybody's busy and, you know, this, that, and the other. And so I got fired from that too. And so then it was time I knew it was time then to get diagnosed. At this time, my father had already died in 2010 from vascular dementia. And my mother was in the last stages of her Alzheimer's journey. And that was in 2014, 2015. And she passed away in 2015. October of 2014 is when I was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease and having 2 copies of APOE4. So that were very difficult. And that's when, you know, reality set in, watching my mother pass away. And now I'm on the journey, which I never thought I would be.
And one of the things that you mentioned is that, you know, for the initial diagnosis in 2014, like that was obviously very hard. And like you didn't receive a whole lot of support from the doctor at the time. Like, can you tell us a little bit more about what was that process like and what happened at, you know, during the diagnosis?
I was diagnosed 4 different times. Once by a neurologist, twice by 2 different neuropsychologists, and 1 by a neuropsychiatrist. When I first got my diagnosis, I was at the neurologist's office, and you know, they ran tests and they did a scan of my brain and this, that, and the other. And when it came time to get the diagnosis, we were in the doctor's room, and he came in to give us the results. And where he positioned himself, if we were sitting with our backs to the wall here, the door was to our left and they had another wall going along on the left. He had a chair sitting against that wall, but it was not facing us. It was facing like towards his desk. And he said, well, I got the results, and he started reading, stuff off of it and so forth. And it was stuff I had never heard of before. He's talking about this OPOE4 thing and, this, that, and the other. And so I stopped him and I said, listen, while I appreciate you telling me all this background stuff, could you just tell me whether or not I have Alzheimer's? And he paused and he says, yes, you have what we refer to as early-onset Alzheimer's disease. And I said, I know about Alzheimer's because I saw my grandfather and my mother. My grandfather died with it, and my mother is going on her journey right now with it. I've never heard of this early onset thing. And he says it's just for people that are age 65 but still have Alzheimer's. And 65 and under have Alzheimer's. And I really don't remember too much after that because I broke down. And he just sat there. Not a word. Just sat there for about, 3 minutes. Got up and said, I'll be right back, and walked out the door. But a couple of minutes later, his nurse walked in, handed me a prescription for Aricept and a prescription for Namenda. Said, here, the doctor wants you to take these and come back in 6 weeks. Didn't give me what doses to take, didn't give me any information about what these medications were supposed to do, nothing. And she walked out. And it was just my wife and I sitting there. And she says, what do we do now? I said, I don't know. I have no idea. So we stood up, got out, walked out, got in the car and went home. And then I started looking up information online with the Alzheimer's Association. And that's how I got involved with them. Mm-hmm. Is not from any type of referral, not for anything. And, Maureen and I are extremely passionate about that because the majority of people that get their diagnosis, I won't say they go through the exact same thing, but they have gone through a less than informative evaluation.
A good comparison is if somebody goes to the doctor and gets diagnosed with cancer, the first thing that the doctor's office does for them is assign them a patient navigator and tells them where to do, what to expect, who to call, what they'll do for them. They don't tell them, here's your diagnosis, get your affairs in order, good luck. And I can't think of a disease that is more needing a navigator than a disease that affects a person's brain and ability to think.
And Maureen, I was wondering, is this also a common theme? Because you work with people living with dementia and their families. Is Brian's story also a common theme that you hear among people that you work with in terms of feeling bewildered after the diagnosis, the lack of support? Is that quite common among people you work among?
Yes, it's what brought me to become a board certified patient advocate, was how many times in 27 years of doing what I did was to hear people, not just with dementia diagnoses, with almost any diagnosis that falls primarily on the elders of our communities. And I know that early onset and many other dementias don't only affect people 65 and older, and I'm certainly not lumping them into that group of people, but unfortunately our medical community does. If you have a diagnosis of dementia, you're lumped in with everybody who is elder. And that in and of itself is a very different, when you meet someone who's in their 80s who's been diagnosed, how you're going to work with them so that they have a life worth living is very different than how you're going to work with somebody who's in their 50s or their 60s or even their 70s. But the medical community makes no differentiation. And actually, I would say to you, and this is me talking, not Brian, that most people in the medical community, once they hear that an individual has a diagnosis of dementia, they envision them as already being in a nursing home or in a memory care community. They don't envision them as capable, very capable, intelligent people who have just received a diagnosis that's going to change their life, but it's not going to kill them right away. It's not going to ever actually probably be the thing that kills them. It'll be a comorbidity that goes along with it that does. But, it's an opportunity for them to start their life brand new and with guidance, with somebody, or with a village holding their hand, and with a dementia-friendly community. It doesn't have to be a death sentence.
And Brian, that's something that you've done, right? After you got your diagnosis, you got really involved in dementia advocacy, and that's eventually how you met Maureen as well, right? Can you tell me a little bit more about how you got involved with dementia advocacy, and how important is it for you in terms of finding meaning after your diagnosis?
I got involved with the Alzheimer's Association in the early part of 2015, because I didn't know where else to turn. And once I went to them, once I went to them and explained what my background was, I was asked, would you have a problem talking in front of people and telling them your, what went on with you and how do you feel and so forth and so on? I said, not at all. I'd be more than that. That's what I did, in my professional career.
Can't keep them quiet. That's the problem.
So, ironically, I was living in Pensacola at the time, and my first I'm reading some comments here. Okay, I'm looking at the people that are on here listening, and I didn't realize that most of them are the people I know. So anyway, I went to Fort Walton Beach at it was a daycare place, and I spoke to the people that went there for daycare, as well as their care partners. And little did I know that Maureen was there in the crowd. So she was at my very first talk that I gave. Problem is that I did not remember her being there. I remembered very few people that I talked to and met. But then after that, I've spoken at, I don't know.
29?
Oh, yeah, 20. On 29 occasions, I have spoken, and Maureen was at the majority of those of those conferences,
and spoke on the same stage as you.
Yeah,
sometimes.
Yeah, she said she spoke with me on stage. you know, I had no idea, none whatsoever. And then okay, you want me to tell it? All right. So then what brought us together was, and we were in Louisville, Kentucky, and it was the last night or the 2 nights before the conference was over, and a group of us went out to dinner, and Maureen was one of the 4 that went out to dinner, and so we were sitting down there having our dinner, and I realized that before I went to the conference, I had gotten new business cards. And so I said, I wanted to make sure that y'all have my new contact and, this, that, and the other. So I started passing out my business cards. What I did not know, and she tells me that I knew exactly what I was doing, but I did not know, and I will use that until I die. I pulled out my room key and handed it to her thinking it was my business card. And then she looked at it and she goes, "Oh no, you ain't playing no Alzheimer's card on this. Had given me your room key instead of no." And she just went on and on. It's like, oh God, what have I done? Well, time passed. And here we are. It's one of those things that it was a match from the get-go. And
5 years.
5 years in the making.
But you know what happened when he handed me that room key? Yeah. Is every other time that I had interact. Oh, by the way, no is the answer to the question you're all thinking. So, what happened was all the times prior to when I interacted with Brian, I was always interacting with him as a person living with dementia. It was always me wanting to talk to him, to get him to talk to, people who I worked with and such. Once that room key came into play and I stopped treating him like a person living with dementia and started treating him like a man, he remembered me then. So it's a lesson for everybody. If you don't want to be remembered, just treat them like they have dementia. If you want to be remembered, treat them like you'd like to be treated.
Yeah.
And Brian, how important was it for you to have met someone like Maureen? Because before you met Maureen, you were also, aside from the Alzheimer's diagnosis, you also went through some pretty difficult transition period in your life, right? In terms of, moving in with your friend for some time and then receiving a diagnosis of vascular dementia in 2019. Can you tell us a little bit about that transition after your early onset Alzheimer's diagnosis?
It was rough. I went through what a lot of other people went through. You don't look like you have Alzheimer's. Oh, but you sound so good. You can talk in complete sentences. And how can you have Alzheimer's and not be able to talk or be able to talk in complete sentences? I don't know anybody like that. And it's like, why don't you just treat me as a normal human being?
So he was asking about what you went through between the time that you received your diagnosis and the time we met. You were divorced from Shannon?
Yeah, I got divorced, or I was divorced from my wife. I thought it was a great idea to move, and so I moved in with a friend in Tennessee, and that lasted for a few months, and
That friend had dementia.
oh yeah, she also had dementia. So that was interesting. But moved back home after that. Moved into an apartment, and unbeknownst to me, while I was in that apartment, I was not doing well at all. I was existing basically on frozen waffles and coffee and the occasional piece of fruit somewhere, and peanut butter. Yeah, peanut butter was my go-to. Nutritionally, I was not doing well at all. I had gotten down to 141 pounds, and I hadn't been that weight in I don't know how long. So I was not. I thought I was doing great, but I wasn't taking my meds. I was not remembering to take my meds. And then comes Maureen. And she completely changed, she completely changed my life, both mentally, physically, and medically. Because, we each have our little pill boxes. And I had these pill boxes, but it was, they weren't working for me. I don't know why, but I don't know. So we got our little pills once we got together, and she would be going this fast, and I would go, and so what's this little pill do? The red and green thing. And she goes, oh well, that's for your this and that. What's this blue pill, and what's this red? I had no idea what the pills I was taking. Now,
he was actually taking old prescriptions.
Yeah.
Along with the new prescriptions. The doctor would see him, say, I'm going to give you this for your diabetes. And Brian would not understand that he was supposed to stop taking the old one. He did not understand that the insulin that he had was only good outside the refrigerator 30 days. He, would take his medications when he thought about it. He just had all the pill bottles all in a cabinet, and when he thought about it, he'd go take one of everything. Not good at all. I don't understand how you can give a person living alone who has dementia medical care and not realize that you're probably handing them a loaded gun when it comes to prescriptions.
And so, right, you mentioned that, meeting Maureen has helped you so much in terms of taking care of yourself. So I'm wondering, and Maureen, feel free to weigh in on this too. Like, what are some of the daily symptoms of dementia that you really experience nowadays? And what are some of the strategies that the two of you do employ, like day-to-day strategies that do help with you cope with the symptoms?
Well, one of the things that I used to deal with were hallucinations. I would see these shadowy figures that would only appear at nighttime. And there were lots of them that would come and go, but there were two consistent ones. And they were a man and a woman. And the man would come over on the side of my bed and just stare down at me with this menacing look. And the lady would stand at the edge of the bed, at the end of the bed, and just smile. And she always had flowers. So I nicknamed them my mom and dad, because my dad was sort of a very strict a very strict man, and raised my 3 brothers and my sister and I all in the same manner, which, but that's another story. But these were the 2 constants. And then Maureen comes along, and she hears, of course she can't see what I see, but she can hear me yelling at these things that aren't there. But
you weren't yelling at them at that time. You were just yelling.
I was just
yelling. You were scared,
yeah.
obviously, and for good reason.
Right. And so one night I was yelling at the man, and he wouldn't leave. He would just stand there. And so I picked up a slipper and I threw it at him. Now, Maureen got the bright idea that she was going to do the same thing. So she picked up her slipper, and now she couldn't see who this thing was, but she knew the direction that I threw the slipper. And so she threw the slipper in that same direction, and it hit him. And he got so mad that he just disappeared. The lady at the edge of the bed still stood there with a smile, with a flower, and then she just very slowly faded away. I haven't seen either one of them since that day or that night.
So to be a little more accurate, there were several times that he had these 2 visitors after we got together, and what I was always taught was you go to where the person living with dementia is mentally, emotionally, and so I did. I knew he was scared. He didn't yell at them in the beginning. He was terrified and frozen with terror. And so it was actually I who started yelling at them, because I wanted to empower Brian. I didn't want the fear to be what froze him. And so it was over a course of many months of this happening. And yes, we did have a time where we threw slippers at them. But I wanted Brian to know I was in there. Those are real to him, whether I can see them or not. They were real to him, and I wanted him to feel empowered that he could control the situation. And so eventually those 2 people, we've had several other interesting visitors over this past year, but Brian is always in control when he sees them. It's no longer a fearful thing for him, and he's able to, command them to leave, and they do. I also keep reminding him turning on the light helps, but if you're a drama king, you're a drama king all the time. So.
But
And,
the last one of the last. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Brian. Sorry. Yeah.
I was going to say the last hallucination that I had, and this is kind of funny, but I woke up and I have a chair that sits on the side of my bed, and that's usually where I'll change clothes and so forth. I sit down because my balance is not good. So I learned that it was better to sit than fall over. So I sat in this chair to do my clothes. Well, one night I woke up and there was this guy sitting in my chair. And the paper towels that have Brawny, the Brawny guy on with the red and black checkered shirt and the boots and all this stuff. Well, it was Brawny. I don't understand why he showed up in my bedroom or what he was doing there, but it was Brawny. And so I started yelling at him. not nice things. And Maureen woke up. She says, "Who are you yelling at?" I said, "It's Brawny. He's sitting in my chair. Why is he sitting in my chair?" And she goes, "Well, tell him to leave." And so I just started shouting at him to get out of here, and he finally left, and he's never come back. But that was just strange. I mean, he had no part of my life. But
and the rest of it is what? Normal?
I have never in my life claimed to be normal. So.
And Brian, I wanted to ask, because you mentioned that another thing is also that sometimes when you wake up, you have this brain fog, right? And one of the things that Maureen does is like she would put on the music for you. And so can you tell me about how much does that help for you in terms of like waking up to just soothing music? And yeah.
Well, when I was living alone, I woke up with this fog. I didn't really know why I had it. Wouldn't know what it was or anything like that.
How long it lasted?
Yeah,
what you did while you were in it?
Yeah. So now I wake up, and if I'm in a fog, she knows immediately. She can tell by the look on my face. She can tell by the way that I talk, because I mumble. I don't really talk. And so she recognizes it. And yes, I'll come out here into the living room and sit in my chair, and she'll put music on for me. And that music just kind of brings me back to my reality, and helps the fog dissipate. And without her, in my life, I'm not really sure. I'm not sure where I would be right now.
Well, we do more than just the music. When he wakes up in a fog, the first thing I do is get his meds into him, because although I am not a doctor and I don't play one on TV even, I know that the only major organ in the body that needs sugar to survive, and Brian's a diabetic, is the brain. And so I want to get his meds into him right away to make sure that I get his sugars balanced out to what they should be. I also get him to drink a cup of coffee, and I try to get him to eat something, no matter how little, to start getting his digestive system working and sending things up into the brain. I find that if I'm needing to pull him to where he stays with me, when I say not physically, mentally pull him to where he's here with me, skin-to-skin contact works. I have a lot of catchphrases that I can use to determine where he's at and see if it's pulling him back. Yes, after I have done all of those things, I use essential oil sometimes to the smell to bring him into the present. And when I see that he's starting to roll back into the present, then I leave him alone for a while and just, let it kind of work itself out. I check on him, of course, obviously, regularly. But we've had fogs that lasted, 36 hours. We've had them that have lasted 3 hours. He had one recently where he stopped talking. And now the word's gone from my head. I can't think what it's called. But he often has problems with it. But he literally couldn't say a word. He couldn't make a sound. And what happened was later on in the day, he fell. And when he hit the floor, it caused him to say a word that we won't repeat on here. And I didn't care so much that if he was okay. I said, "Oh, my word, you spoke." But someone's asking about essential oils. Aphasia. Thank you, Melinda. Yes, aphasia. And what I just use is, I usually use citrus, like orange, because when you peel an orange, it makes you feel happy. It makes you feel light and maybe a good memory. So I usually use some type of citrus. I don't think it's anything magic. I just think it's what we smell can make us go places in our mind. So Also, a big thing for Brian was getting him to stop watching the news all day.
Yeah. I used to be a news junkie, so my TV was on all the time.
And one of the things I wanted to touch upon, Brian, and I think you were touching upon it just now, is also about like the stigma with dementia. I know that you've been outspoken about it. I want to ask the two of you, like, and wrapping things up here is like, what do you think are the biggest stigma with the illness, and what has been your personal experience with that?
The biggest stigma that I would say is that people think that as soon as you get a diagnosis, you start to die and you have very little time left. They don't understand that we still live a pretty good life. You know, we do things that, and I use the word normal, and Maureen usually tells me, she goes, but you are normal. You just have this disease. But I'm talking about a person that is disease free. But we still lead a good life. We still do things. Now, there are days where she makes me get out the house. You know, she says, you know, look, I gotta go to so-and-so's to pick up some stuff. Come with me. I just want you to get out the house, breathe in some fresh air, because I've become very homebody. Yeah, a homebody. Seclusive. Is that a word?
Reclusive.
Yeah. And I just didn't want to have to go anywhere. I felt very comfortable. I love it here, and I'm okay with that. But I realize now when I get out, then it's like, whoa, this
Another
is fun.
stigma you should talk about is when you're with me, whether it's or I'm with you at a doctor's office or out in public. Yeah.
They look at Maureen and they ask her questions, and they say, well, you know, what does he do when? And she says, of course she knows, but she says, I don't know. Why don't you ask him? He can tell you. And then they go, oh, well, Mr. LeBlanc, what do you do? And I'll answer that question. And, you know, it's always an experience when you meet new people and they know that you have this disease, or even if they don't know that you have this disease, and you're talking to them for like 15, 20 minutes, and then the Alzheimer's thing comes out, and they look horrified. It's like, oh my God, you have Alzheimer's? And it's just these reactions from people.
Mm-hmm. Well, people will come up to us in public,
yeah,
and whisper to me, how's Brian doing, when he's standing right next to me. And one of the things we've learned to do is teach people to be comfortable with laughter and around us. And so we try to always make it something that's got some humor to it, you know. Like if they ask me, how's Brian doing? I'll turn to him and I'll say, how you doing, Brian? Or, you know, something like that, because we want, and people will look at me and they'll look for permission to tease Brian, and he loves to be teased. So I'm okay with them looking to me, because the first person that ever disrespects him will be sorry they didn't look to me first. But in the meantime, realize that he's not deaf, nor is he dumb.
You don't want to mess with her.
And if Brian needs my help, even when we're on one of these, I can see him look at me when he needs me to give him some help. So
I'll even be in the middle of a presentation and I'll stumble on a word, and then all I do is this. And I look at her and she knows, and she throws me the word, and then I just take off from there. It's almost like my brain just has this black cloth that comes down and blocks me from saying something.
Right.
Well, she has the cords and she raises the curtain. So I did want to answer two questions on here. One asked me, one of the, I can't remember who it was, I don't see their name anymore. Oh, reason for your divorce. Was dementia the reason for your divorce? And the answer to that is yes. Not on my part. So yeah, that's all I'll say about that. And then there was another.
Just say what the question was. Was it this one?
Oh, the brain scan. Yeah. We can't even get the brain. I've recently had a brain scan, but the very first.
And they found nothing.
Yeah. Found this big hole. But my original neurologist, we have tried and tried and tried to get my brain scan from them. They will not release
your
it.
MRI.
No, MRI. Yeah, they won't release it.
But yes, you are supposed to get, when you get your diagnosis, you're supposed to get your baseline, and then you should, every once in a while, your doctor should want to see how things are progressing.
Right.
And the last question I have is, last question here is, can you tell me a little bit more about We Are Dementia Strong, the organization, and what you're hoping to achieve with the organization?
Well,
Oh, go ahead, Sean.
no, you.
Well, it was, as I said in the beginning of the show, it was born out of necessity during COVID as a way for Brian to remain engaged in his passion. But what we learned after we got started was that it was a rarity for people to have in the same setting a person living with dementia and their care partner who would share their own nothing held back own experiences, and that includes mistakes. I admit readily that I argue with Brian and I fight with Brian, but then I ask myself this: if Brian didn't have dementia, would I argue and fight with him? I absolutely would. So that's our way of getting through things. So we started then to people, what would you like to know about? What would you like to know about us? And they would ask us, and in fact, someone who's here watching your show, I don't see where Melinda went. There she is. Melinda is a music therapist for people with dementia, and she wanted us to talk about how Brian and I use music. People ask us to talk about, and now we interview people. They ask us that they want to know things. We find experts and we bring them on, but always we reserve our basis. Our tenor is that we want people to be able to see us together with all of our imperfections, living life that we love, loving each other, and watching Brian progress. But I'm also progressing. I'm learning every day. I learn. I do this professionally, but it's very, very different when you're having the lived experience. So I am so grateful for everything that I learned.
Right. And one of the great things is you bring together like two different perspectives that are equally so important, right? From the caregiver perspective and person living with dementia, and having those two perspectives in the same podcast is so important, isn't it?
We heard Nancy Reagan on CBS Sunday morning. Of course, obviously it was a recording. And she said, when it comes down to it, you can have a whole team of people helping you through Alzheimer's. But when it comes down to it, it's just the person with Alzheimer's and their primary care partner that are doing this alone together. And when you realize that, and I had that realization the first time Brian went into a fog that lasted multiple days. Scary. I didn't know what I was going to do, what I was supposed to do, but I knew that I was going to be with him through everything. And more, it's beginning to open my eyes to how much it is going to be just he and I.
Mm-hmm. Not exactly what we wanted, but it is what it is, and I am so grateful that she didn't give up trying to get me to remember her. And but it, now, of course, not now. I would never forget her.
Well, but the other thing is people were concerned about, understandably on both sides, people were concerned about us getting into a relationship. And I knew that this wasn't like any other relationship. I knew that if I got into a relationship with Brian, there was never ever going to be, we're not together is the answer to the problem. This was not someone who I could just decide one day I was in love with and the next day I wasn't. And dementia challenges that love pretty regularly, but it's not something, I don't love him on good days only. And I'm with him forever. And I could be the first one to go. So we have it all set up in case I die first. What's going to happen with Brian?
Right.
Well, thank you both so much for sharing your story. I really appreciate it. And yeah, so thank you everyone for joining us for this live talk today. Bye.